In a world where retail dynamics are perpetually shifting, understanding consumer behaviour is now more crucial than ever. And as we navigate this landscape, retail spaces transform into realms where every element is a dialogue with the consumer. In this episode, which we're calling Behavioural Blueprints, we'll be diving into the nexus of environment and psychology with our guest, Ian Scott, co-founder of the Rema report and luminary in retail strategy. Ian, it's a privilege to welcome you to the Phygital Lab. Thank you for joining us today. And before we dive into behavioral blueprints in our constant fashion, could you briefly share with us what was the last book or publication that comes to mind that you read, and tell us sort of why you chose it and the impact it left on you?
Okay, well, I do an awful lot of driving, so most of my book consumption is audiobooks. It has been for many years. And I've just finished one of the Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series, remember, made famous by Sean Bean on telly. And I've often found that rather than using highbrow intellectual information, I use escapist thrillers to pass the hours on the motorway. So I think it was about the 16th of the 20 books. So I just finished that and I put everything on a USB stick. So I've now got to upload. It has about 8 different authors that I rotate through. I've just finished them, so I've now got to upload the next issues for each of them. So there's that. Or I have Autocar magazine that I subscribe to, which is my toilet reading, maybe a little bit too much information there. So I've just been reading about the latest EV cars that I won't be buying as well during the day.
No, that's awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think everybody has different ways, different things, and different ways that they like to consume new information. A couple of our guests on here they like snippets. I'm not sure whether it's toilet reading, but I would say it's probably something similar. They just weren't brave enough to say it. But and then others might prefer, sort of cover to back reading books. But thank you for sharing that. It's always interesting to understand how the pioneers in the industry that are forcing people, helping people to think differently, what they spend some of their spare time kind of consuming. And on that note, I want to talk about reviewing your career and reviewing the areas that appear to be what you're most passionate about. I want to talk about your application and insights on sort of consumer psychology and how that helps to or how that could help retail, visual merchandising, not necessarily design in its classic sense, but kind of how that could be approached. And I'm keen, reflecting on the initial fascination with retail when you were back at your pop agency in Leicester. How was your view of sort of integrating consumer psychology within sort of retail, physical retail, evolved over the years? Can you share sort of a tip or two on balancing those kind of universal principles?
Sure. I mean, the first time I worked for that POP agency, it was my first experience of retail, and I was immediately, it's like a light bulb came on in my head, because it's like everything in industry and advertising and production is a whole supply chain that leads to the point where a customer buys something, and retail is where the customer buys something. And I was fascinated because I've been in the business supply chain before that, and you add your influence and then it sort of disappears down the line. And then it's hard to measure the impact of your bit because it's added to everyone else's bit as it goes through. Whereas when you get to retail, you can observe straight away what you've done and whether the customer buys more stuff as a result. So that to me was something that really excited me. And I sort of referred to it recently as the sharp end of business. It's where the advertising, the design and the manufacturing all come to a head. And it's where the customer puts their hand in their pocket and buys or doesn't. So you can put things into a store and very, very quickly find out whether it works or not. And I was talking to a client the other day and I said, you are so lucky to work in an industry like retail, because I cannot think of another industry where you can come up with a new idea, you put it in your own space, your customer comes to you and gives you money so you can find out whether your idea worked. I mean, every other industry in the world would die to have that opportunity. And what it does also mean is that your retail space has to constantly test and learn and evolve, because you can't sit still. It's constantly evolving. So the day one of working in that agency, I was just like, wow, this is really cool. I want to get involved in this. And here I am, 24 years later, still excited by that principle, really.
Can you do you think that that principle um, remains the same even even to today? So from then to now, it's still the
Oh,
same thing.
absolutely. I mean, you have things like COVID, and you had all this rubbish coming out about new normal and how our habits have changed. And to me, COVID proved that we don't change much. The moment shops open, we flock back, like we flock back to restaurants and cinemas and holidays and haircuts and all. Well, not that I needed one, but there were all these. We were denied social interaction, and suddenly we went back to it. And the Chinese came up with that phrase, revenge shoppers, where we like overindulged, overcompensated because we were denied it. And all it does to me is reflect the human behavioral aspect of that. I always say, why do you go to a restaurant and pay 3 times as much for the food that you could cook at home? And aside from the fringe benefit of not doing the washing up, it's the people you're eating the meal with. And these sort of things reflect. And I often say, if you understand human behavior, you're 90% of the way there to designing an effective retail space. Everyone talks about, oh, it's different in my country and my region. That's 5%. 5% may be the uniqueness of your category. We buy a car differently to how we buy milk. The other 90% is understanding humans. And when I say understanding them, you don't suss it and go, oh, got it, because they're cheeky little buggers. Their mood and their reaction and their behavior will change every single time. And I often liken designing the perfect store to trying to play the perfect round of golf. You'll spend your whole life getting better, but never quite nailing it because there are too many variables. I remember I was with a director of Lego, stood outside their Leicester Square global flagship. And I said, you spend millions building this store. Now you're stupidly going to open the door and let humans in, and they're going to ruin it all. Because that's the joy and the frustration of retail, is way too much of it's humans. So the more you can understand about principles of human behavior and decision making, the better you can be. But the problem is there's no consistency in how those variables are applied. The customer that comes in one day that loves you will hate something the next day, and you've changed nothing. It's just what's going on in their head, their lives, the mission and the reason they're coming into the store will be different. And to me, it's fascinating. But then I'm not investing millions in my own stores and worrying about getting it wrong. I'm just one of these smart asses that turns up after all the hard work and go, yeah, that didn't work, did it? Or that's brilliant. And then I walk off. So I'm very conscious of the freedom and liberty that I have at the expense of other people's hard work in that respect.
But that's fascinating, and I think we've just solved the whole problem. So 90% of it is just understanding human behavior, but then of course you've got everything else around that as well. But that's interesting that the way you see it, sort of, it's that 90% and that other 5 or 10% that might alter based on location or culture or something else. But the bottom line is we're all humans. We have our fundamental drivers, and we are fickle, and we are emotional, and therefore
Absolutely.
when we go somewhere on a Saturday afternoon, we might have one perspective, and life is the way it's had it, so it's had that impact on us. But by the following Wednesday, we might go and visit the same place and feel completely different about it, and change our behaviour and how we interact. And it's almost having that flexibility, isn't it, in whatever you're looking to try and design. And I guess on that note, when we think about sort of behavioral aspects of shoppers, how if you were to advise me, how do you leverage this sort of fascination to help influence store layout decisions? And is there anything particular that you can remember that sort of where you've advised on, that's made a difference for your client?
To me, I was always fascinated by this sort of thing. And I never knew I could earn a living getting involved in. And I'm not a behavioural psychologist. I'm not trained in design. I've never run a shop, and I'm not a behavioural psychologist, although I do observe on these things. And I very openly say that. To me, a lot of it was just common sense in sort of seeing that. I mean, I remember when I worked for that POP agency, they were part of a massive global group of businesses, one of the biggest in the world. They were the biggest in the world at the time. And a number of the agencies within the group had pitched to win work for a huge off license that had over 2,000 stores at the time. And so they had the sales promotion agency, the advertising agency, the PR agency. What they hadn't done is included the retail design agency. So I got called into a meeting where the CEO and the marketing director were having this meeting with these different agency people going, look, we need to look at this, how are we improving it? So I got called in. I had been in that job as business development manager for 4 weeks. So I was called in as the retail expert, and I had 4 weeks expertise in retail. And I sat there with the CEOs and MDs of these multi-million pound companies and this billion-pound client. And there were conversations going on like, yeah, you need to put your logo on the tissue paper that wraps around the wine. And I was going, Jesus Christ. And I just sat there for an hour just writing notes, keep my head down. And then the CEO of this off-license went, you're the retail expert. And I went, yeah, maybe. And he says, what do you think? And I just turned around and I said, you've got 2,000 stores, which means you've got 2,000 windows, which means you have 2,000 billboards in every town. I think every town apart from Sunderland and Milton Keynes, they had a store. And I said, so what you need to do is message in that window to give people reasons to come into the store. And he commented that they had these stacks of 24 packs of beer on the floor, and there were 2 in each store, so they just stacked up to sort of waist height, and you picked up the top one. And he made this off the cuff comment that £10 million worth of stock were in these displays in 2,000 stores. And I just said, that's the most expensive retail display I've ever seen. So I said, you need to get people to come in, and then you need to persuade them to buy a little bit more. So like, you just persuade them to buy a packet of crisps. He says, we would make £10 million profit if everyone bought a packet of crisps with a pack of beer. So we came up with such a simple, obvious idea where you had a plinth and some shelves, and you could put them at different heights. So if it was a high turnover stock, you just have the plinth and stack loads of packs up. If it was a lower turnover, you would have the shelving, and then you just put 3 or 4 packs on top. So immediately we've saved them £3 or £4 million worth of stock. You print a graphic around the side and you sell it as advertising promotional space. So this month it's Guinness. Guinness will pay for the wrap, and then you put Guinness on top. Revenue stream. Put a little shelf and put peanuts and crisps on it with a little prompt and a call to action, so they sell more stuff. And these things cost £100 each, and we were saving him 3 or 4 million in stock, plus revenue, plus upsell. And I just sat there and discussing this. And I discussed it with the creative director, and we came back, and I was going, this is not my retail expertise. This is bloody obvious common sense. And ironically, we pitched the idea, and it cost you £500,000 to put these in the new stores. And they said, well, we can't do that because we have shareholders, and I can't spend that £500,000 in one quarter and not have the return in the same quarter. And they went bust 9 months later. And you look at this, and I was just like, oh my word. This is a crazy industry because, again, so much of it is just, to me, common sense. And I often say to people, you have no excuse not to think like your shopper, because we are all shoppers. And I often say, take your Tuesday morning head off, like we are now, and put your Saturday afternoon head on. So you're sat in the boardroom making all these decisions with deadlines and KPIs and budgets, and you sort of can't see the wood for the trees. And then at the weekend, you go with your family and you become the person you're trying to engage. So again, this is a uniqueness with retail. You want to see what's going on? You just walk down the high street or go to the shopping centre. So you can see what's going on in your industry. And you are also one of the consumers and the target audience. And I'm going, I can't think of another industry where everything's just laid out for you so easily to access, interpret, and improve. Medicine doesn't have this opportunity, shipbuilding doesn't have this opportunity, and you look at so many other industries and it's all laid out on a plate for retail. I'm not saying it's easy, but it's accessible. Too many people in retail don't have time to visit shops. And I run retail safaris, and I take people around cities all around the world. And this is really picking up now, because I think people are going, okay, let's dedicate a day and go and look at some interesting stuff. And you have that opportunity. But, to me, it was just common sense all the way through that process. To come up with that idea after 4 weeks experience showed that a lot of it is just stepping back and looking at the bigger picture and applying common sense more than anything else. Not that I'm decrying all of the expertise in retail that people have, but a lot of it is common sense. And then you can add experience and industry-specific focus to add extra benefit as well.
I think a lot of brands and retailers out there today, and those people that are responsible for making these kind of big strategic recommendations on store layout, modifications, design, there's a distraction there, whether it's from technology, whether it's from too many insights, whether it's from all this data. And actually, I think it makes complete sense, and it is logical to take a step back. Remember, you're a human being. Remember, you shop, you consume for a living. Without it, you'll fickle away. So maybe a really good recommendation or a baseline for this blueprint is when you're in the boardroom, remove your boardroom hat and put your consumption hat on for a minute. Take
Yeah,
yourself away from the reality of Tuesday or Wednesday afternoon and put
yeah,
yourself into Saturday morning mode or
yeah.
Saturday afternoon mode. And that's it. And that's interesting. I mean, that's is basically answer my next question, which was, how do you analyze or interpret kind of consumer behavior when it comes to making strategic recommendations on store layout modification? And there it is. That's it. It's almost like a marriage of common sense, basic human behavior,
Yeah.
all within a context of place yourself in the shopper's position.
Yeah, yeah.
And that
Well,
and that.
I often say, I mean, one of the things that I rant about a lot is the way we focus on Gen Z. And I was actually invited to a Gen Z conference last year. And I said, I don't think you want me here. And they went, why? I said, because I just think most of it's bollocks. It's just, you treat 2 million people. First of all, you treat them like they're one person. Gen Z want to do this. And then you sit there and put them on this pedestal. And I'm going, they're just the youngest generation. Yeah, they're engaged and they challenge the system and they're reactive and they're using the latest technology. So did we. So did my parents. So did my grandparents. They had the radio or they had a television or the internet. And now we've got AI and apps. That's just progress. That's just the baton being passed on. And I often say the only unique thing about Gen Z is like when you and I were growing up, we learned our values from our parents, from our teachers, and most importantly, from the big kids in the playground who really taught you about life. These kids have got a phone in their hand, so they can go and find their own values, better or worse. And sometimes it is worse, but they will go and access information as they're forming their own opinions and beliefs. Whereas we were taught them, and then we learn how to interpret them. But otherwise, it's the same. So you have this sort of Gen Z like this, Gen Z want that. And I just can't help. It's like a flashing light on LinkedIn. I just have to wade in and go, this is rubbish, And when I do my presentations on this, I show pictures of my 17-year-old son. And I just go, look, he plays basketball. I've got a picture of him coming over from school with his tie around his neck. He sleeps till lunchtime, he grunts. And everyone laughs because it's typical teenage stuff. And the next slide, I show a picture of the chair he chose for my dining room because I let my kids choose their own chair. So there's different chairs. And it looks like your grandma's armchair. It got it from IKEA and it's like an armchair in big pink floral pattern. And everyone laughs, but I'm going, you show me in all your Gen Z research where Ben would have chosen that, having showed you the fact that the music he likes and his basketball and stuff. And I'm going, the point is, we're all individuals. And I know from a marketing point of view, you can't come up with 2 billion different solutions. But I'll go, forget that. I mean, the way that Gen Z is categorized and millennials is rubbish. Someone just drew a line and go from that day to that day, they're like this. And that these age groupings don't reflect socio-economic or political happenings. I'd understand if the day the internet was born, you draw a line, or when a world war ends, or there's a recession, or, these things that will influence society. But it's not. And someone told me that, I think it was McKinsey maybe came up with these Gen Z, boomer, millennial things. I don't know if that's true. But, I look at it and go, so if I was born a day earlier or a day later, you would treat me completely differently because I'm suddenly a millennial, not a Gen Z. So I'll go, that's rubbish. And then the next stage is you will have so many brands will go, this is our customer. And she's called Mary and she's 35 and she drives an Audi A3. And it's more bollocks because one, the moment you say Mary, you've forgotten about half the population because they're men. If she's 35, you forget that your audience is different grouping. So you immediately narrow it down. And what you need to do is work on missions and need states. Why is that person shopping? Not who they are, not which bloody car they drive up to the supermarket in. It's why they're buying. And I use a supermarket as an example. At lunchtime, you come out of your office and you want to go out and get a meal deal and get out. And supermarkets are clever with this. They don't con you. The meal deal stuff is right in front of the entrance because people will not go into a 100,000 square foot supermarket and wander around trying to find a meal deal. They just go to the corner shop. So you go in there and you get your packet of Christie sandwich, your can of Coke, and you're off. And then on Wednesday evening, you're doing a weekly shop for your family. And we all know that the cost of food has skyrocketed. So you're going around with your trolley trying to get the best value so you can feed your kids. And then on Saturday night, you're inviting your boss around because you want to chat him up for a pay rise. So you want to cook a nice meal. So that's the same person, be that Sharon in her Audi A3 or some Gen Z, and 3 visits to the same store in the same week. First one's speed, second one is price, the third one is quality. So unless you understand these potential missions, you're guessing. And I keep saying retail is a very expensive place to go guessing if you get it wrong. So I say, again, a very simple throwaway line that is about 2 years' work and £5 million for most businesses to implement is find and recognise as many of those missions as possible. What are all of the different reasons? There's a wonderful company called Uncrowd run by Richard Hammond and his business partner Rocky, who do this research work to understand the different missions of why people may come to your store. So you find as many of them as you can, then you find the most cost-effective way of covering as many of them as possible in your store while still making a profit. And I'm very conscious. That's a glib thing for me to say, but it's a simple metric, very hard to implement with a business that is siloed with legacy processes and the fact that they're not connecting their physical store insights to their digital data, which is one of the hardest things, is bridging those two. But if you could do that, then you're onto a winner. And some companies do it really well, some guess correctly, some guess badly, and others just stick their blinkers on and just wander off the cliff into oblivion because they don't adapt. And so it's really important to understand that. Why is that person coming in the shop? And I often joke about, the scenario of a husband on his way home has forgotten his wedding anniversary. He'll pay anything for the right product. It's more than his life's worth to not buy it. But the problem is, when the guy comes to the door, you don't know whether he's price sensitive or it's just, I must have something, apart from the mad panic and the glazed eyes that might suggest the husband who's forgotten the anniversary. So you need to be able to understand as many of those as possible, because sometimes it's not about being the cheapest, it's just about having it in stock.
Yeah. And that makes complete sense to, rather than obsessing around profiles and pen profiles and call groups and all of this, it's actually to look at what is the mission. What are the varying missions from these different shoppers, and rather than discriminating by, as you say, basically age group. When a person was born in time,
It's such a binary thing,
Yeah,
It's
it is absolutely, and people kind of try and correlate this with innovation and say, well, Gen Z is so different from where we were at that age because the world's a different place. It's actually not. It's just it's a small amount of progress. We've progressed in certain areas. Technologically, we've advanced quite considerably in the last 30, 40 years. Of course we have. And the pace keeps getting quicker because we're refining our understanding. And it will keep going that way. And then the new 14 and 15-year-olds of, the next 5 years, Gen Alpha, that's going to be like, oh my God, how are we going to communicate with this convoluted, mixed, opinionated, highly digitally savvy group of people? Well, just remember they're humans.
Yes.
Remember,
that's one of the other rubbish lines you get from Gen Zs. Are they digitally native? I sit and watch my 84-year-old dad do everything on his smartphone. We adapt. I mean, they are more advanced.
it's adaptation,
That
right?
advancement is huge. It's not huge steps between millennial and Gen. It's gradual. The technology is advancing. We're more engaged. We mature quicker. We learn faster. But that is a steady growth curve. It's not these steps between these age groups. And that's where I just roll my eyes and just go, this is rubbish. Stop doing this. You're wasting time and money. And the problem is, when these research companies come out with this, brands pick up on it. And they go, oh, look, it's on a bit of paper. It's a LinkedIn report. And they veer up. It's like NPS scores. That's another one that drives me bloody crazy. How likely are you to recommend this service to someone else? What the hell has that got to do with understanding how people shop? And there is so much bias around NPS scores. And people build their whole strategies around you going, please give us a 9 and we'll give you a £10 voucher. How are you getting valuable insight when you're bribing someone to say something nice? You know, and it's nothing to do with behaviour anyway. And I often say here, one of the biggest issues, the best way to observe a customer and understand what they're doing is to watch them when they don't know they're being observed. Okay. You have a focus group. I'll pay you £50, I'll stick you in this room, I'll give you a coffee. Do you like our products? Yes. Can I have another coffee, please? You know, focus groups are good for opinion, and opinion is deeply flawed. You know, you ask any policeman who's got 5 witnesses from a crime. Oh, it's a man. He was a woman. He's 6 foot tall. She was 5 foot tall. She was blonde. She was dark. He ran away. He drove a car. And that's not because people are liars. It's because human recall of things that happen is deeply flawed. And particularly when you go into the world of retail, where a lot of our decisions are spontaneous, subliminal, and as you said before, emotionally driven. And a lot of that activity disappears from our memory within seconds because we deem it irrelevant. You know, I've interviewed people 20 seconds after I've observed them shopping, and they've told me completely different recall of what I just observed, because most of it was irrelevant. They don't care. You know, it's gone. You know, you can stick with a lie detector test or put a gun to their head, and they still couldn't tell you what you just watched. So you have to observe. And assisted shops, again, walking around, why did you do this? And you're making people think consciously about things that were subconscious. And this is, like I say, the joy and frustration of retail. That shopper will go into the shop 2 consecutive days and act completely differently because the influences are the row they had with their partner, the fact that they're in a rush, it's raining, the kids need, you know, picking up from school, whatever, a million reasons why they react differently to your amazing display with its carefully focused group messaging and its highly optimized standout images and stuff. It will work one day and it won't the other. And there's not much you can do about that because you've got humans in and they're a variable, a frustrating variable.
Yeah, no, indeed, indeed. And I think that leads us on to this next step, which is really handy. I want to talk about. I know everyone uses the word innovation in various different spheres, and we talk about trends as well. I want your viewpoint on this. I mean, from your experience, you obviously assist and advise on across various different areas of retail, probably from high end luxury all the way down to kind of like the fast moving mass merchandisers or mass retailers. When you look at trends, sort of global retail trends, in fact, some of the things you mentioned there are also trends. Does any example sort of stand out for you that addresses this kind of nuanced behaviors of shoppers? And when it comes to things like experimentation and the role it plays in kind of physical retail, I'm really getting to understand now how your mind works. So how do you encourage brands to sort of embrace a more innovative approach in their thinking or a
Yeah,
more experimental approach in their thinking? You know,
yeah.
what's your advice there?
Well, I mean, just taking one step back, I used to run a lot of innovation workshops in my previous job, and I do a few now still as well. And I often said to people, you know, innovation to me, the definition of innovation isn't AI or VR goggles. It's a new way of finding a solution. And sometimes that can be very boring, obvious, and analog. It's not all about technology. So you can look at that. And I used to say to clients, okay, we need to recognize and understand who you are and what you do. We need to recognize who the audience is for your products, where you sell. Do you have global flagship stores? Are you online? Is it a Facebook marketplace? You know, where do you sell? And then the fourth one is, how do you measure the impact and success of a new idea? And I immediately say to people, beyond sales. The sales is a self-regulating thing. You know, you've got a till and you can add up. But, you know, are you targeting new audiences? Are you trying to upsell? Are you introducing a new product? What are the objectives? And I say, so there's your 4 pillars: who you are, who buys it, where you sell it, and how you measure it. Your new idea needs to tick 3 of those 4 at least, otherwise don't do it. So that creates a focus. And once they buy into the 4 pillars, you can then use those 4 pillars to beat them over the head and drag them back into life. But what I love when you see creative retailers, I mean, Nike are a great example, is they don't have a store. Someone said to me, what do you think of the Nike London store? And I go, well, I can think of 5 different store concepts that they have in London. They've got the Unite, they've got the Live, they've got the Rise, they've got Nike Town, and there's a running one on Sloane Street. So what they're immediately doing then is tailoring different offers for different audiences, which I really like. And they combine a real sense of theatre. Wow, you go into the ground floor of Nike Town and Oxford Circus or any of the House of Innovation stores around the world, and it's loud and fun and display and enjoyment. And they have a window display that hints at that. You come in and see it. Then you go up 2 floors to where the product is, and there's an element of it in next to the product on the fixture as well. So you get a curiosity from the window, an immersive enjoyment on the ground floor, and then a reminder where the product is. So they connect them all together, which is very, very clever. And so you see that sort of thing going on. They're very good at test and learn as well. You go to their live concert, which first opened in California about 5 years ago, and it was building local community. And they would look at not just sales data, because the problem is sales data is after the fact. If you're buying a pair of running shoes, you bought them, you're not going to run back and buy another one the next week. So this is a problem with a lot of that data, is it's telling you what you just missed out on trying to sell to the customer. But what they also do is they look at browsing data. Now, browsing data is potential. So if they understood the catchment area of the store is, say, 5 miles, they'd be analysing what are people looking at. So if they've got a store full of basketball stuff and then suddenly everyone's going out running, they change the stock. And it's bam, right, let's get all the basketball, not all the basketball, shift that out and let's re-emphasise running, because that's what people are interested in around here. So that is a wonderful example of just understanding your audience, tapping into what they're interested in, and then responding quickly. And most retailers wouldn't be able to change the stock out that quickly because their processes just don't allow it. And this siloing that you get with a lot of legacy retailers going, oh, it's going to take us 3 months to do that because we've got this, and they give you all the reasons why they can't, which are real reasons. And you go, well, how do you break down those barriers? So to me, a lot of innovation is in the incremental gains, like Sir Dave Brailsford, who did with the British cycling, and he's now going to start at Man United, which annoys the hell out of me because I'm a Liverpool fan, so I don't want to talk about that at all right now. I'm still in mourning. But that idea of 1% gain here, 1% gain, and you add them all up and you've made a 10% gain, which is a great way of doing things as well. But the final thing I want to say about innovation is, for it to work, you need to be top down. Okay, a lot of companies do. Innovation is that thing you do when you haven't got anything else to do, and no one ever has that opportunity. Or you have one day to start and then you never get to finish because they're busy doing proper work. So you need the CEO and the board to go, this is part of what we do. And I did an innovation workshop with McDonald's last year. They have a team of 11 permanent full-time employees whose job is to look at new ideas. And they're focused on how do we find new ideas, how do we rationalize them, and then how do we actually build them into what is a very complex system, which is wonderful to see. And too many companies don't do that. And the final thing is, innovation is uncharted territory. It's a new idea or a new solution, which means failure rate is high. I would say on average, 50% of innovation should fail. Otherwise, you're not trying hard enough. And that scares a lot of people. But I often say you learn more from a failure than you do a success. If it works, you have no idea whether you max the opportunity until you go too far. You may go, sales are up 5%. It's incredible. But that solution could deliver a 20% increase. So you don't know until you push the boundaries. And if it goes wrong, you go, well, what can we learn from this? Why has it gone wrong? And it may highlight other opportunities or other problems that need fixing. And I often try and say that the failure is as useful as the success. And a lot of companies struggle with that because they want 100% success rate. And I go, that's not innovation. By definition, innovation is uncharted territory. So it should fail a lot, but that's a good thing. And you can see people's eyes glaze over and they get the nervous twitching in the corner of their eye when you tell them that that's what's probably going to happen if it's done properly.
Yeah, innovation is exactly that. It's trying the new. It's balancing risk versus reward, but it's also, even if something fails, it doesn't necessarily mean that the innovation has failed. And it will probably 8 times out of 10 expose new opportunities, for that brand, for that retailer. Let's talk about visual merchandising for a second now. And you said one of your statements that I really liked is that retail is sort of the ultimate point of marketing delivery.
Yeah.
So when when it comes to VM, and VM has changed significantly, particularly in the last sort of 5 to 10 years. Physical has become more theatrics, experiential. It's more about driving emotional engaging, captivation rather than transaction. Although transaction is, of course, still important, but it's about identifying those shopper journeys. But for you, when you're in one of your workshops or when you're talking to a client, how do you approach VM, sort of capitalizing on this sort of critical moment of consumer decision making? And then from your perspective, what's the next big thing in visual merchandising that brands should be aware of to sort
Yeah.
of make sure they're influencing consumer behavior effectively?
Okay. So to me, with visual merchandising, you're straight back into human behavior territory and some understanding of the movement of people around streets. I've read research saying that all the people walking down the street, only 3% will notice your window. And I say it's quite a chastening statistic that you build this beautiful window and it's operating off a 97% failure rate. But I say the upside is if you create a slightly better window and there's a 1% more see it, it's not a 1% gain, it's 33% because you've gone from 3% to 4%. So the potential to uplift is huge. So you need, I think, 3 seconds to grab attention in a window. And I often reference a window that Zara came up with about 5 or 6 years ago, which they called the virtual catwalk. So their global flagship stores, like the one on Oxford Street in London, just had a big white window. And then there's a QR code on the window. And you scan the QR code and download the app. And then you hold your phone up and there's an augmented reality catwalk in the window. And you can imagine in the boardroom how cool this sounded with some millennial going, it's cool, and the QR, and they download our app and we do this. In reality, what happens is, like I say, 3 seconds to grab attention. So immediately, most people have ignored that game. I'm going to carry on to next where I want to buy a pair of jeans. I'm not scanning a QR code in the window. Download our app. Right. The word app fatigue, the phrase app fatigue is very real. I think I've got about 80 apps on my phone. I don't want another bloody app on my phone. I don't know why you want me to download your app, but there is no incentive. And so you download that. And if you think you've got these few seconds, so I'm going to sit there for a couple of minutes to download the app. And I tried it in the window in Oxford Street. It didn't bloody work. And then hold up my phone to watch what should be in the window in the first place. This is asking a customer to invest more time and more effort for your benefit in the hope that they may come in the store. And most customers will be like, sod that. I'm going to carry on. Why should I download your QR code? So stuff like this is, again, it's common sense and understanding the dwell time, attention span, and basic human behavior. But then when you come, and I always say there are basic levels of communication from visual merchandising. The primary role of the window is to get you to go into the store. It can do other things as well and inform and engage. But the primary role is come in here because there's stuff you might want to buy. And then the moment you come in, you have the decompression zone where you come in and go, okay, what's going on here? And so, a lot of clever brands will have a poster or a totem going, welcome, here's clothing and food and fashion and jewelry or whatever. You go, this is what it is. And then the next thing is you have category signage, wayfinding. That's where the food is. That's where the clothing is. So this simple navigation. And then when you get to a category, it'll be like, welcome, this is what we do. And then on the shelf, the communication is buy this, don't buy that. Very basic principles. And you can have promotions and sampling and cross-selling, but that's the basics. Come in, this is what it is and where it is, and buy this one. So if you reverse back from that, you're then looking at the different types of communication. And coming back in response to that last part of your question, what is one of the latest things coming through is retail media networks. And this is another one where I drag out my soapbox, dust it off, and start ranting because it's a huge hot topic in retail. Well, basically, you put screens in your store and you sell advertising space. And people are seeing the dollar signs because it's additional revenue that they can create. And I think Walmart has stated their aim is to become the biggest media owner in the world. Media owner, not retailer, media owner. And so you sell the space. And I've seen a few examples of this. And I posted on LinkedIn about one last week that just, it highlighted the worst of this. And I was in a huge Tesco's Extra, I don't know, 120,000 square feet. And on the side wall, at the end of what they call the spine aisle, the one that runs right through the middle, that you never walk on because you zigzag up and down through the aisles instead. And right against the wall, there were 4 screens, over some pallets of beer. And there was a loop of 5 bits of content. And one of them was for Cadbury's cream eggs, which was 5 or 6 aisles away. And I'm going, this is the problem you have with this, is you see that and go, I want a Cadbury's cream egg. Then you turn around and there's beer and washing powder and dog food. And you go, oh, I need dog food. And you go down the dog food aisle and you've then forgotten about chocolate. The proximity of that message needs to be right next to the product, because in a supermarket, there's probably 20 categories you're going to go into. And you've forgotten about that other category. This is the one here and now, because you're not going to walk back because it's too big a supermarket. You're going to do them in the order they go, and you know them. And that's another thing, is when the supermarket changes those aisles, lunacy, because people will leave these days. I know the trick to make you go down the dog food aisle. I don't own a bloody dog, so don't try and trick me to go down the aisle where I used to buy my baked beans. I still want to get the baked beans, but anyway, that's a separate issue. So with retail media networks, they're not thinking of the content. They're excited about the ad revenue. And I'm like, yeah, get your ad team involved, but get your shopper marketing team as well. Because you get this classic, oh, we'll put the TV ad on in the screen in store. And again, a television advert is about brand recall when you're sat on your sofa. So when you go in the shop, you go, oh, I recognise that one. I don't know why I don't recognise that one. I'll buy that. That's the brand recall. But in the store, it's buy me now. It's a different message. So, and the message on the shelf is different to the message at the decompression zone, which is different to the message in the window, because there are different tasks you need to engage the shopper with at each of these stages. And my concern is that if you're, say, Tesco's, for example, and Unilever, you're talking to Unilever about selling Marmite, they go, great, we're going to give you 2 shelves. Now, just, stop off at the ad department on the way out and just book some ads, and there's that wonderful balance of power between brands and supermarkets where they'll try and strong arm and spend 50 grand on an ad campaign. Now, if that campaign is crap and it's the wrong message and it doesn't engage people, the second time round, Marmite are going to go, well, that didn't work, so I'm not going to do it. So if you have the wrong content on the screens, those screens will be empty or full of Tesco's TV ads in about 18 months' time. I'm not going to go at Tesco's, I'm just using them as an example, but I would love to see a retailer understand the power. And when Unilever go, we want to do this Marmite thing, I'd love to see someone like Tesco's go, don't do that, it won't work. They won't do that. They'll take the money. And what you need to do is become a strategic partner to work with the brands to maximize the effectiveness from your understanding and insight of what works in your store. And everyone I've seen, particularly in America, they're just getting a hard on for the ad revenue. And I go, that is short-termism, because if that content isn't in the right place, this is not going to work. And there is a huge investment in the screens. And as someone that used to work in POP agencies, fighting to get another £5 per unit budget to do an analog constructed display, I roll my eyes in despair where they'll spend millions on fancy screens. And I'm going, well, that freestanding display unit that's secondary sited next to complementary products will deliver more sales than a crap bit of video content. And I always say that your fancy 8K high definition screen does the same job as a clip frame. It delivers a message. And I was once asked what was the most innovative store I'd visited recently. It was an Aldi concept store in Derby. Not a single screen. It's just that every message was in the right place at the right time, saying the right thing. And I said, sadly, that is innovation, because a lot of people can't do that. It's not about the technology. It's about the message. And a well-constructed, printed graphic will do a better job than a crap screen saying the wrong thing, in my opinion.
You're absolutely right. We just become oblivious to it, or we're sort of actively just diverting our attention elsewhere because it's this kind of interactive apathy.
We deselect information now. I read somewhere that I think we absorb 15,000 messages a day.
Yeah.
So you add more messages and we just go, I'm going to blank out. And I saw an interesting social media post when Walmart in the US started to introduce these screens. And some guy posted a picture going, my supermarket looks like a casino now. And I know there's that you get often a negative reaction to a new thing, and then people get used to it. But supermarkets are really busy, noisy places for communication. And I was in Sainsbury's test and trial store in Witney in Oxford in Oxfordshire, and I went in there and it was the same. You looked across and there was just a sea of messages. Some are bright, shiny, some are animated, and you look at it going, I can't differentiate this. It's too much. And you end up with what the psychologists call the paradox of choice. There is so much information, you can't make a decision. And that's why you have the cliched but true statement of less is more. Break it down so it's easier and more simple. People absorb it quicker and they buy more. And it's been proven time and time again.
No, it's true. I think this technology is. I've said this to a few people now. Should be seen as a vehicle, and what's hosted within that vehicle, what rides within that vehicle, is key. I think if the use of technology in the physical space today needs a serious think, and I think, and that leads me to my next question about technology and how how it is changing the way consumers are interacting with retail in particular cases. And we've briefly talked about, well, we have talked about just now how it's complicating the traditional retail engagement. And this is an area that you're obviously passionate about. So how do we uncomplicate it? And I know we talked about where it's all about the content, it's all about the message. You can't have too many messages all in the same place. It's going to create convolution. People are going to not understand what you're trying to do, and they'll just do that. They'll put the blinkers on and they'll go back to their personal device, which is where they can be more selective about the messaging.
Exactly.
So how do you? What's the advice for getting it right? How do you enhance without overcomplicating?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I read a study many years ago, and I keep trying to find it again to back it up. But I read somewhere that 20% of in-store communication doesn't work. It's ineffective, wrong placement. The challenge is knowing which 20% it is. That's the goal. And if I knew, I'd be lying on a beach, not talking to you on this podcast. But so I think there are basic efficiencies, but that comes back to the test and learn. If you try something and then change it, you find out if it works. So, very simplified, and a load of researchers will leaping up, you've got to do proper A/B testing and like for like. And I understand that, but you need to do that. And testing can also be taking things out, not just putting things in. Because people always think they've got to add. And as I've said before, there's too much crap in stores anyway. So take it out and have that ability. If you have 100 stores, try 5 of them with something different, change the window display. I was chatting to the store manager at the Foot Asylum new flagship store on Oxford Street, Liam, and it was wonderful to say, well, we had the classic sort of movement sensor, cameras that measure people, and they had a classic analog counter of people walking in and out the store. And he said the problem is we didn't know who was staff, who was return. If a family came through, it may only count them once, or it may count 4 of them individually. And he says, so we put cameras in, and we have cameras facing out. And he says, what's interesting, we can count how many people walk past the store. But we can also, because it's got a 5-meter reach, count the people on the other side of the street. Because if you think about it, one pavement's only half a footfall in the street. So he says, we'll put content on these big screens they've got on the window, and then we'll change it. And we're not looking at how many people come in now. We're looking at the percentage of people passing by. Because people coming in your store is only half the information. Because if you have a day with 20% less people, your conversion ratio, you don't know the conversion ratio. You maybe have a brilliant window and you're converting more of the people walking by, but if there's less of them walking by, it looks like you've got fewer people coming in. So we said, we can do that, and then we can track mobile phone signal, which is a standard sort of research methodology now. And the great thing with a mobile phone signal is they're all unique. So you then know which person has come back a week later because you recognize, anonymized, but it's a unique signature. And then we can measure dwell time. Are they going to the back of the store? How much time? And he says, we're connecting it to sales as well. And I went, how are you doing that? And I love the basic sort of logic in that, well, if they stood at the till for 30 seconds or more, they're buying something. And I love it. It's just common sense with high-tech data. And then they'll connect it to sales data. And they're viewing this story because there's things we've done in this store that we don't think work. We've learned from it. So the next time we won't do it. And we're constantly trying different content in the windows to see what works. This is the sort of thing where you make progress. They've got 61 stores. So they're going, okay, it's our shiny new flagship and it's Oxford Street and it's important. But there's 60 other stores that sell more combined than Oxford Street does. So if we take a learning from that we can roll out and apply to the others, we get a compound gain from that knowledge. And I love that idea. Most people get their shiny new flagship and they go, "Da, we've done it. That's loads of money. We can't change this." And these guys are going, "No, what can we move? What can we, evolve?" And that attitude is where I think it really works. And they'll test to learn and find out whether we need more or less of something. And that's something everyone should be doing.
Well, that's always been a recommendation for a few decades now, to
Yeah.
testing and learning. And I think, but it's right. It's right. There are so many different ways that you can improve a situation, and if we don't try different things, I love what you said about, it's not always about adding something in. It could also be about taking something away. And also, don't fear that when you add something in, it's not actually a screen. It's going to be, might actually be a static, clip poster or something else, or even something with that's static with a bit of backlighting. Don't be scared that we're not introducing an AR mirror or a smart
Yeah.
mirror or
Well,
something
sometimes
else.
it's about
No?
contrast and standout. I remember I had a
Yeah.
conversation with a big drinks company, and we did some research in duty free, like airport duty free stores. And you go in there, and the challenge was how to create standout. And in the end, I said to them, "You need to create a matte black, non-illuminated display, because that's the only contrast." You go there and everything's red and blue and shiny and sparkly and moving. Imagine all these drinks and health and beauty, and their head of insights burst out laughing. And I said, create a black hole in the middle of the visual noise. And sometimes it's about contrast, not shouting louder. And sometimes, when you first evolve, you illuminate your bay and your bay stands out. When everyone's illuminated, turn some of your lights off. Not say turn it all off, but, and suddenly create a differentiation between you and everyone else. And that's a constant rolling feature, because the moment you do it, they copy you, and then you've got to move the goalpost again. But that's the joy and the fun, and it's why VM people have a full-time job, not a part-time job. It's because there's always something else for them to do. There's always another challenge that the business has found that you're tasked to sort of overcome. And I think the VM guys are awesome. I remember I went to an IKEA store in Wakefield, just between Liverpool and Manchester, as part of a retail safari. And I went in there and I'd seen things I'd never seen in another IKEA store. Beautiful little touches, like in the blinds and curtains area, there was a little 5-second video loop projecting onto the wall, and it was some blinds and then someone pulling down and peering and looking out and pulling back up. Funny little bit of movement, and it just captured, one, the tone of voice and the sense of fun that is in IKEA, but it's an endorsement, this is the category. And then in the sleep area, they had netting above the beds, going 4 or 5 meters in the air, and they just projected a little video of feathers just floating down. And it was real subtle. It wasn't a load of features and benefits of beds. It was just feathers, and it gave you a context to the category. And the VM team there had sort of gone rogue. It was a ask forgiveness, not permission sort of thing. And IKEA loved it. But, their in-house VM teams are encouraged to be creative like that. And I've never seen these treatments in other IKEA stores. They may be adopted by others now. But that sort of approach of going, how do we set context? And they had scent pods, chocolate in the food area, obviously. But what I love was in the baby area, the scent pod was talcum powder. And I went in and I didn't immediately go, that's talcum powder. But again, I'm suddenly like, I remember changing nappies with my kids, and just suddenly that smell put me in that environment. These sort of things, these little touches, are brilliant. And it's not connected networks or VR goggles. And like was Lush, one of my favourite retailers, I often refer to their stores as wonderfully analog. And I'm not anti-technology, but I often say to people, you haven't maximised your analog yet. Go to Lush and see how all the messages, the communication hierarchy, the tone of voice, the way they will emphasise headlines in bigger text, small detail in smaller text, blah, blah, blah. All of it is a textbook of how to do visual merchandising and display. They now have some screens in the store. You go to Oxford Street and there is one screen on the wall where you can book a spa treatment, and some little screens at the checkout tills. That is it. Everything else is analog, and it's a textbook example of how to use your space. I'm not saying you shouldn't use screens, but you don't have to. You don't have to get excited. And I often say, the investment in screen technology is sometimes a vanity project so the CEO can boast at the golf club on Sundays. It almost feels like that. There's this irrational overspend on technology, whereas there's this miserly sort of protection of budget on analog things. And there are benefits of both. It's just I know which one costs a lot more to implement, and that's the technology.
Absolutely. Do you think it's got something to do with this need or wanting to put technology into the store without actually rationally thinking it through? I mean, the examples that you just suggested from IKEA are, I would say, less to do with digital integration and more to do with sensorial stimulation.
Exactly. They were
Because
projectors, not screens. Yeah.
exactly, I mean, the same thing could be achieved through some kind of transparent screen. It would probably cost a lot more,
Yeah.
um, but I love it. I love that stood out to you, using scent diffusion, because of course, and I love the fact that you connect to it because we know all about sensory stimulation. Limbic system in the brain evokes memory, and then you've got and the talcum powder is a beautiful touch, and obviously the feathers and using relative content that isn't blatantly obvious but blatantly relative to
Yes.
create wayfinding
Associated.
signage. It's fantastic. It's the next step in store navigation, is to actually do something that's both subtle but relative, and it aligns with the shopper journey. But obviously, a lot of brands are trying to integrate technology into their store, and to me, a lot of them are lost. And I think part of it comes from this drive of wanting to create omni-channel, trying to create some kind of consistency. A lot of people spend a lot of time online looking at our brand, and we're learning about all the rest of it. But then obviously when they come to the store, they want to interact with the store, surely, with their phone, and they're going to want to do this. When you have, because you must have brands that say this type of thing, how do we create this omni-channel consistency, consumer experience, multiple touch points? What's your bottom line advice when you
Well,
approach that?
some of this is blindingly obvious basics again. Same tone of voice across different ones. So, I work in I do some work in residential, retail, apartment letting work where I customer shop. And you will have a show home, and then you'll have a professional website, and the girl in the office that does Snapchat does social media. And you have this disconnect where you've suddenly got emojis and exclamation marks and pouting teenagers after having created a corporate website. And that's an extreme example. So you need a consistent tone of voice. And this is the challenge, because you've got different teams working on different bits. They need to work together and share information. Otherwise, you get a shift in tone of voice. Same product, same availability, same price. I'm sure you've had this experience. I've had it before. I'll get them on a Saturday morning, go, right, I'm going to go into the shopping centre. Oh, I want to go into that store. I want to get that product. So you go online to check its availability and its price. And then you go in the store and it's £20 more because it's an online only offer. And you're going, I've got my arse driven into town, into this store you've designed. And now you're telling, and you often even have the staff go, oh, no, you need to buy that online, mate. In the store, the staff employed by the brand telling you to get back in your car and go home. I go, no, I'm in the store now. Why is that different? So some of these are just basics, that you should put in. Consistency, accessibility, because like you say, everyone goes into a store and they get the phone out, compare prices, take photos and share the content. You're immediately in this, I call it symbiotic retail. It's how the different channels work together, because that store experience will lead to online sales. And Sephora have recognized this. They say, we open a store in a new city, website traffic from that city increases. The store has driven online engagement. And so you will find these sort of things. And then the flip side is proactive brands like Nike. You go into their House of Innovation stores, you have the app. And I went to one of their stores in Westfield and I got a buzz on my phone. It's, hi Ian, welcome to Westfield. It was the Nike app welcoming to the mall, saying we look forward to seeing you in the store. Great way of navigating you in. And then you go in and you can scan, using the app, you can scan products, learn about them, buy them. You want to try something on in the changing room? You can go, yeah, I want to try on this top. It already knows your size from your previous buying history. So your size is way. Now, this is good use of technology because it's focused on making it easier for the customer as well as surprising and delighting them. So that connectivity, now I know that Nike pushed the boundaries of the technology interaction and not everyone can afford to do that. But if you just get that consistency, that's the basics. Same tone of voice, same product, same availability, same price, then because the customer will flit across. And I often fabricate an example of an omni-channel a journey, like, someone's watching the World Cup and they see Messi has got some new football boots. And you go, oh, they look cool. So then you go on Messi's Instagram account to have a look at them. And then you go on the Adidas website. And then you visit the store, you try them on and buy them. You get home, they send you an email saying, thank you for buying from us. Then you post on your Instagram your picture of you wearing the book. You've flitted across 7 or 8 channels in this journey. Seamless, subconscious. You're not thinking of channels as a consumer. You just go, I'll go on Instagram, I'll open the website, I'll use the app, I'll go to the store. So that all needs to be consistent. It's one ecosystem. Unified commerce is another phrase. Phygital, to use your own title. It's not recognizing the different channels, it's making them work together. You may go into Nike Town in London to be inspired by something, not buy anything. 2 months later, sat on your sofa, you may buy it on the app. But that was triggered by the visit to the store and the experience. You're just not in buying mode, you're in browsing mode because you're in London anyway, and you were curious, you're not in buying mode. But it will trigger the purchase weeks, months later. Now, it's very difficult to track to see that Nike Town contributed to that sale on the app, sat on your sofa in Huddersfield or Dundee or whatever after you've gone back home. But that's the reality, is that the store will boost online sales and the website drives traffic into the store. And that whole ecosystem is one thing. And a lot of companies struggle with that. When I posted about that on LinkedIn, I had one guy going, but I've got a spreadsheet for my bit. And I'm going, well, your spreadsheet's the limiting factor because your spreadsheet's only this bit. You need all of this because that's what the customer's doing. And I said, I know it's an easy thing for me to say. I'm just telling you, this is how customers engage with your brand, explore, discover, and buy now. So you have to reverse into that. This isn't the 70s. You can't con and trick people into buying things. It doesn't work these days. I remember when the Superdry store opened on Oxford Street and their CEO proudly announced it was the most innovative store on Oxford Street. And I took the bait. I went, right, let's go and have a look. And it was all the same usual Superdry stuff with some sustainability messages. There were 2 escalators. Both of them went up. And I was walking around going, how do I get out of this bloody place? Right at the back of the store with a tiny sign was some stairs. And it was like, you can't do this now. You go up, make it difficult to get out. They'll walk around everything and buy more. It doesn't work. You piss people off and they will not come back. This is 1970s retail trickery. And now people know too much because smart arses and loudmouths like me go on social media and talk about what a horrible experience is. If you annoy customers, they're very vocal in their annoyance these days, and you cannot control or filter. It's not ringing up your customer service department where you can respond and then hide it. It's on social media. So you have to approach this in a more inclusive and welcoming way, I think.
It goes back to the study of the shopper mission and our basics as human beings. So it's going back to that behavioral observation, behavioral analysis point of view, isn't it? If you understand humans, then you're going to get it right. And and as you said, as brands, when you're Nike, you've got a developed ecosystem. You're in the great position there where you're just testing and learning constantly. So if we do something to somebody here on their shopper journey, I wonder if they'll come back through here, or will they navigate out here and then we'll deflect them and bring them back here. And that's where the cleverness is now within what brands can do, as opposed to shutting all the exits and saying you can only go this way. Or not giving somebody an option to come down again, aren't you giving them the ability to go up? I think it's about being clever or cleverer with how you want people to interact and surf around the ecosystem that is your brand's universe. And Nike do it really well, and some other new brands doing it well. I think in the luxury sphere, LV do it fantastic well. Stella McCartney's growing into that space, and when you can see it. You're coming in on one channel, you're being deflected, you're going round another, you're sat back home, but you're remembering something, you're reconnecting through social media, and it does make sense. It is big. It's a much bigger world to play in now. But equally, I think it's much more exciting, more exciting. I think, Ian, one final question. In light of the passion that sort of drew you into this world of retail, how do you personally envisage the future of our sort of cherished offline spaces? Where do you how do you see them evolving?
Well, I think, I mean, first of all, what you get a lot of people saying is, oh, it's all experiential now. And I'm going, well, yeah, but still 75% of all global retail sales happen in a store. So you still got to sell shit, you know. You just have this immersive space where you put VR goggles and it costs £1 million. And I'm going, yeah, but you're capturing that engagement, but you know it's like the classic museum experience. You have to walk through the gift shop to get out. You have this experience, you're inspired, and then you shove the product under their nose at the time when they're inspired, and you have to make sure you do that. So I always think we always overestimate change. You know, you think Back to the Future. We're on hoverboards in 2015. You know, we always over exaggerate change. It's normally a lot slower. You know, I think in 10, 20 years' time, there will be more around personalization. AI is interesting. It is not the future of retail, just like the metaverse. Remember that one? That's not the future. Nothing is the future. Everything is a little bit of one part of the ecosystem, even AI. Now, AI has probably got huge potential because of its proactivity to learn and evolve. But, you know, if you look at a physical store, I always say three unique aspects. Okay, you can touch and feel product, particularly relevant in categories like food, clothing, home. I'm never going to buy a sofa without sitting on it, for example. Then peripheral vision, the ability to be distracted by other things. A website is a lot more linear and binary in the way it presents product. You choose one and it appears on the page, and then maybe three or four prompts at the bottom. You go in the store and there's 500 things in front of you. And then the other one is interaction with other humans. Back to this sort of human element, and staff will either make the experience horrible or amazing. You know, they're a physical embodiment of the brand. So you have those three unique things. So you shouldn't use them. I think AI will help with data recognition, insight, personalization, standardization of repetitive systems. The moment you take all the humans out to put in technology, it's a very expensive website because you've got to pay rent as well. You know, embrace the uniqueness, and as we found coming out from COVID, is we rushed back to do all of the things that were social interaction. It just endorses that, you know, any behavioral psychologist and most people with common sense knew is that we are social creatures. So embrace that and use it. By all means, use the technology to enhance the unique aspects of the store is probably the simplest way of saying that. Don't lose sight of those unique aspects. I saw a store on LinkedIn this week. I think it was in the Middle East somewhere, and it was a store, and all the walls were just digital screens with images of products on the shelf. And you tap on it and you place an order, and it was an unmanned store. And I was like, what's the point? It's a website. And apart from the novelty of it as a shopping experience, it is soulless. So embrace the unique. It's like digital has its own unique attributes. And what you wouldn't do is take out some of those digital attributes and stick a human in the middle of it, which is slow and more cumbersome. You know, the great thing with the digital bit is you can have 1 million people shopping at once. You can't get 1 million people in the physical store. So, you know, there are pros and cons for both. Convenience and availability with the website. You can sit at home, order it, and it arrives tomorrow. Or if you're an idiot, they'll try and deliver it to you in 20 minutes and lose millions doing it. But, you know, so there are benefits. So embrace the unique benefits of each of the channels and enhance them. Use technology to enhance them, not remove them, is probably the main thing I would say.
I love it, Ian. There's so many. What I generally like to do as we're coming to an end of one of these chats is try and somehow summarize everything I've personally taken away. And
Yeah,
there's so many, but I'm going to give it a bash. I mean, I think that what's very clear to me is start by identifying with who you are. You're a consumer. Everybody that works in business today is a consumer. You're a shopper. A lot of those aha moments are sat right within you.
yeah,
Just take your boardroom hat off on a Tuesday afternoon for a second, to quote you, and stick your Saturday afternoon when you're the dad looking after your family, when you're trying to impress the boss with a meal that evening, or when you realize you got to take all the kids to footy practice or wherever it is, or netball on a Sunday morning, and you've not got any breakfast in. So think about the fact that you are the shopper, you are the consumer, and by understanding that, you're understanding shopper missions, shopper ambitions, intentions. That is 90% of it. The rest of it is geography and cultural differences. But most of the time, if you get that 90% right and you've got a pretty clear understanding of what their intention, their mission is, you're probably going to get it right. I mean, when it comes to the physical space, it's part of a much wider ecosystem, but it is where people want to interact. They want to explore the peripheral. They want to get hands on with everything. And when it comes to technology and its place and role, steady. Think about it. Think about how it can enhance a moment as opposed to lead and distract the whole journey. Because we don't. It's not the 1970s. We cannot be pushed into buying something anymore. You have to empathize first, understand what my ambitions and objectives are, and then use technology to help enhance that journey, make me feel part of it. And I think it's probably so many more when I reflect and look back at this. Ian, there's going to be so many, and I'm really really grateful for you taking this more than an hour to be with us today, and we're going to take so much away from it. So thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. I mean, if I could have designed a podcast to talk about the things I'm interested in, this would have been it. So when you got in touch and talked about the things you wanted to do, I'm going, you're gonna have to beat me off with a stick to not get involved, because it just taps into all the things that I get excited about. So thanks for asking me.
No, thank you, Ian. Perfect. And hopefully we'll have you on again in 6 months' time and review the landscape then.
Love to. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.